John Gotti, later known to the world as the Dapper Don, was born on the 27th of October 1940 in the borough of Brooklyn, New York. His beginnings were humble, his surroundings rough, and his childhood filled with lessons that would later shape the man who became one of the most notorious figures in American organized crime. Growing up in the tight-knit neighborhood of East New York, Gotti was the eldest of 5 children. In a family that faced the struggles of working-class life during the mid-20th century, his father, John Joseph Gotti Sr., worked hard in various jobs to keep food on the table, while his mother, Philomena, managed the household with a firm but loving hand. Life in East New York was far from easy. The streets were alive with energy, yet they carried a silent code of survival that all young boys had to learn. From an early age, John Gotti observed the world around him with sharp eyes. He noticed who commanded respect and who struggled to get it, who was feared and who was ignored. In many ways, his neighborhood was an education in power, loyalty, and influence, though it came without textbooks or formal instruction. Young Gotti's early lessons were learned through observation, imitation, and the occasional confrontation that every street-smart kid had to endure. School offered little refuge. Gotti attended public school 93 and later Andrew Jackson High School, but his focus on education was inconsistent. His mind often wandered, drawn instead to the streets and the figures who seemed to wield control over them. In the bustling avenues of Brooklyn, he watched the local gangs, the small-time crooks, and the enforcers of the neighborhood's unwritten rules. He saw the power they commanded and the respect they earned, not only through fear but also through strategic thinking and a strict code of loyalty. This was a world where actions mattered far more than words, and where reputation could make or break a young man's future. It was during these formative years that Gotti began to test the boundaries of authority. Small thefts, street fights, and other minor criminal activities were part of his adolescence. Some might have called them youthful indiscretions, but for Gotti these experiences were lessons in negotiation, strategy, and survival. He was learning early on how to read people, how to assert himself, and how to make decisions under pressure. The streets of Brooklyn were harsh teachers, but they were also revealing the qualities in him that would later define his rise. Family life, however, remained central to Gotti's world. Despite the rough environment, his parents instilled a sense of pride and resilience. His mother, in particular, played a crucial role in shaping his character. She emphasized the importance of family loyalty and self-respect, principles that would remain with him throughout his life. These lessons were not always formal. They were delivered in everyday interactions, in the way the family navigated the challenges of poverty, and in the unwavering expectation that each member of the household contribute in some way. Gotti absorbed these lessons quietly, letting them form the foundation of his personal code. By his teenage years, Gotti's reputation in his neighborhood was already beginning to take shape. He had a magnetic presence, a combination of charm, confidence, and a subtle intensity that drew attention. People noticed him not only because of his physical stature, but also because of his ability to command a room with a simple glance or a carefully chosen word. His charisma was natural, effortless, and it would later become a defining feature of his persona as the Dapper Don. But at this stage, it was simply part of the complex mix that made him both respected and feared in his immediate surroundings. Work came early for John Gotti. Like many young men in Brooklyn at the time, he took on jobs that offered small wages but important lessons in responsibility and the value of money. He worked as a delivery boy, a truck driver, and in other small roles, learning the rhythms of labor and the dynamics of the working world. Yet, no matter how honest the work, the pull of the streets remained strong. The combination of family loyalty, neighborhood influence, and personal ambition created an internal tension that would shape the trajectory of his life. It is impossible to fully understand John Gotti without acknowledging the environment in which he grew up. East New York in the 1940s and 1950s was more than a backdrop, it was a crucible. The neighborhood's culture of respect, survival, and power, coupled with the challenges of poverty and limited opportunity, shaped the young boy who would become one of the most famous figures in the history of organized crime. Every street corner, every interaction, and every decision in those early years contributed to the skills he would later use to ascend the ranks of the Mafia. As night fell over Brooklyn, the sounds of the city car horns, distant sirens, the chatter of neighbors formed the soundtrack of Gotti's early life. Within this ordinary yet complex world, he learned the art of observation, the value of loyalty, and the importance of projecting strength. These lessons, learned quietly in the streets and in his home, were the foundation of what would later become the rise of John Gotti, the Dapper Don. And so, the story begins, not with headlines or notoriety, but with a boy navigating the challenges of his environment, absorbing the unspoken rules of the world around him, and unknowingly preparing for a life that would leave a lasting mark on history. As John Gotti moved from adolescence into young adulthood, the streets of Brooklyn continued to shape him, teaching lessons no classroom ever could. The neighborhood, with its crowded row houses, bustling sidewalks and shadowed alleyways, was alive with a rhythm that combined opportunity with danger. For a young man like Gotti, who possessed both curiosity and ambition, the streets were more than just a backdrop. They were a proving ground. By the late 1950s, he had begun testing the limits of his environment, stepping carefully into the world of organized crime, a world that would come to define his life. Gotti's earliest encounters with crime were modest, almost ritualistic in the sense of initiation rather than profit. Small-time theft, gambling, and occasional acts of street-level intimidation became part of his routine. He was learning how to assert control without attracting unwanted attention, how to read people's intentions, and how to act decisively when the moment demanded it. These were the subtle, formative lessons that would later become invaluable in his dealings with the powerful figures of the Mafia. Every encounter, every choice, was shaping the instincts that would define him as a leader in the underworld. One of the most critical aspects of Gotti's early criminal life was his ability to observe and absorb the operations of more experienced criminals. Brooklyn, during this period, was home to several small-time mobsters and organized crime figures who commanded respect through a combination of cunning, influence, and intimidation. Gotti watched carefully, taking note of their methods, the way they negotiated, the way they enforced loyalty, and the way they projected authority. Observation became a skill he relied upon more than brute force, a skill that distinguished him from many of his contemporaries. Gotti's reputation as a streetwise, confident young man began to grow, attracting attention from members of the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful organized crime organizations in New York. He demonstrated a combination of fearlessness and charm, qualities that were rare and highly valued in the Mafia. It was during these years that he met influential figures who would serve as mentors and guide him through the complex hierarchy of the criminal world. Their influence was subtle but significant, teaching him about respect, loyalty, and the necessity of maintaining appearances even when engaging in illicit activities. Money, as always, was a central motivator. Gotti understood the power of cash and the respect that came with the ability to control it. He started to involve himself in small-scale operations, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and other ventures that provided steady income while also allowing him to demonstrate his reliability. Each successful venture reinforced his growing reputation and built connections with more influential members of the Gambino family. In this way, he began to solidify his place within the organized crime network, quietly climbing the ladder while maintaining the careful balance of discretion and ambition. At the same time, Gotti's personal life was intertwined with his criminal undertakings. Loyalty to family and friends remained a central theme, and he understood the importance of protecting his own circle. Those who were trusted earned Gotti's support and protection. Those who crossed him or the family would learn quickly that betrayal carried consequences. The careful management of relationships combined with an instinct for timing and strategy became hallmarks of his approach. He was learning, almost instinctively, that power in the underworld was not only about strength, it was about control, influence, and perception. By the early 1960s, Gotti's skills and reputation had matured enough that he began to attract more serious attention within the Gambino family. He was no longer just a streetwise youth testing boundaries. He was becoming a dependable operative capable of handling more complex assignments. From enforcing collection of debts to supervising smaller crews, Gotti's responsibilities increased steadily. His ability to act decisively under pressure, combined with his charismatic presence, allowed him to navigate the dangerous dynamics of the Mafia without unnecessary exposure. These formative years, he was learning the art of leadership, even before holding a formal title. Gotti's approach was never reckless. While many young criminals are driven purely by impulse or ego, he relied on careful planning, patience, and observation. He understood that mistakes could be fatal in a world where reputation meant everything and trust was a fragile commodity. He observed patterns, noted vulnerabilities, and used the information to strengthen his position. These early experiences, though seemingly small, were lessons in strategy that would serve him well throughout his rise. Each interaction, each assignment, was another building block in a career that was quietly gaining momentum. At the same time, Gotti's presence in the neighborhood remained visible, but it was balanced by a need for discretion. He understood the value of appearances, of blending in while maintaining influence. This duality, being both present and strategic, visible and calculating, became a defining trait. It allowed him to operate effectively without attracting unnecessary attention from law enforcement, at least in the early stages of his career. The streets of Brooklyn had taught him well. Survival and success depended as much on subtlety as on action. As the years passed, Gotti's early criminal activities became more structured and intentional. He transitioned from minor street-level offenses to organized operations that involved coordination, planning, and leadership. He became increasingly involved in the Gambino family's hierarchy, taking on assignments that required both judgment and authority. Each success, each display of reliability and capability, elevated his standing within the organization. And yet, through it all, Gotti maintained a careful balance of loyalty, charm, and strategic observation, qualities that would become the hallmark of his persona as the Dapper Don. Thus, by the end of this period, John Gotti had completed his initial apprenticeship in the world of organized crime. The boy who had grown up navigating the streets of East New York was now a young man poised for a significant role within the Gambino family. His early life, filled with lessons from the neighborhood, family, and first criminal endeavors, had prepared him for the challenges ahead. The foundations of his future leadership, strategy, loyalty, and influence were firmly in place. And as the story unfolds, it is these early steps into the underworld that set the stage for a rise that would capture the attention of the nation, eventually earning him the legendary title of the Dapper Don. By the mid-1960s, John Gotti had transformed from a street-smart youth into a young man fully entrenched in the rhythms and rules of Brooklyn's underworld. The lessons learned in his early years, the importance of loyalty, observation, and discretion, had matured into skills that made him a reliable figure in the eyes of the Gambino crime family. It was a period of quiet advancement, where patience, strategy, and presence mattered more than violence, and Gotti's natural instincts positioned him for opportunities that many others could only dream of. The Gambino family, one of the 5 families of New York's Mafia, was at that time a powerful organization with established hierarchies, rituals, and expectations. Entry into their world was not a casual process. Each aspiring member had to prove loyalty, reliability, and competence, often by handling assignments that tested both nerve and judgment. For Gotti, these assignments began modestly but carried weight, offering him a chance to demonstrate that he was more than just a street-level operator. From overseeing minor gambling operations to collecting debts for established captains, he was learning the delicate balance of influence and obedience that would define his early career. What set Gotti apart, even in these early days, was his charisma and his ability to inspire confidence. Within the Gambino network, respect was a currency as valuable as money. A man's reputation could determine his future just as much as his ability to complete a task. Gotti possessed an uncommon combination of charm and intensity, a presence that drew attention without demanding it aggressively. People listened when he spoke, not because he wielded authority formally, but because they sensed competence and self-assurance. It was a trait that would later become legendary, earning him the nickname the Dapper Don for both his sharp appearance and his commanding demeanor. As Gotti's reliability became known, his responsibilities within the Gambino family increased. He was entrusted with more complex operations that required coordination, judgment, and discretion. These assignments were not about violence for its own sake. They were about influence, control, and strategic outcome. He began to oversee crews, mediate disputes, and ensure that operations ran smoothly. Each successful assignment enhanced his reputation and built connections with high-ranking members who recognized his potential. In this period, Gotti was learning not just how to follow orders, but how to understand the structure of power within the organization, anticipating needs and understanding the subtleties of loyalty. The street culture that had shaped Gotti in his youth remained influential. He understood the importance of appearances, how to project confidence, and how to navigate social dynamics with precision. These were not superficial skills. They were essential survival tools in a world where missteps could be costly. He observed patterns in behavior, evaluated alliances, and calculated risks with the intuition of someone who had spent years navigating the streets of Brooklyn. Over time, these instincts became second nature, forming the foundation of a strategic mind capable of leadership under pressure. During this period, Gotti also became more involved in gambling and loan sharking operations, areas where his skill for negotiation and conflict resolution proved invaluable. He managed collections, mediated disputes, and ensured that debts were enforced with a balance of firmness and tact. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he avoided unnecessary violence, recognizing that control could often be maintained through reputation and calculated presence rather than constant confrontation. These operations not only provided income but also demonstrated his ability to manage people and resources, a quality that would later solidify his position within the family. Relationships within the Gambino family were central to Gotti's advancement. Mentorship played a subtle but critical role in his growth. Older, more experienced members guided him, offering lessons in strategy, discipline, and the importance of alliances. Gotti absorbed these lessons quickly, showing a combination of respect and independence that signaled both competence and ambition. His mentors recognized a rare potential in him, a combination of loyalty, intelligence, and presence that could be cultivated for leadership. The bonds he formed during this period would become invaluable as he navigated the complex hierarchy of the organization. Despite his growing involvement, Gotti maintained a careful balance between visibility and discretion. He understood the dangers of attracting too much attention too soon, whether from rivals, law enforcement, or even within his own family. This strategic awareness allowed him to operate effectively, build influence quietly while preparing for more significant roles. He had learned early on that power was not always seized through aggression. Sometimes it was cultivated, nurtured, and exercised with patience. These lessons, honed through observation and experience, would become the blueprint for his rise. Gotti's ambition, however, was quietly relentless. He was not content with being a minor figure within the family. He sought to understand the full scope of operations, the nuances of control, and the pathways to influence. He learned to anticipate challenges, identify opportunities, and cultivate relationships that extended beyond his immediate circle. These early strategic moves, though subtle, positioned him for opportunity that would eventually elevate him above many of his contemporaries. Every step, every successful mission, was a building block toward a role that would command both respect and attention on a scale previously unimaginable. By the late 1960s, Gotti was no longer simply a young man learning the ropes. He had become a trusted figure within the Gambino family, capable of executing assignments with precision and insight. His ability to combine charm, strategy, and discipline distinguished him from others who relied solely on intimidation or brute force. He was beginning to cultivate the persona that would later define him: confident, meticulous, charismatic, and, most importantly, feared and respected in equal measure. As the chapter of his early Underworld career closes, it is clear that John Gotti's rise was no accident. The combination of neighborhood experience, natural charisma, careful observation, and strategic thinking had prepared him for the challenges ahead. The Gambino family provided the platform, but it was Gotti's own instincts, discipline, and ambition that allowed him to navigate the treacherous world of organized crime successfully. Each lesson, each assignment, and each interaction was part of a larger path that would ultimately lead him to the apex of power and notoriety, where he would become known to the world as the Dapper Don. By the early 1970s, John Gotti had firmly established himself as a rising figure within the Gambino crime family. The years of observation, apprenticeship, and small-scale operations had provided him not only with experience but also with the confidence to take on more significant responsibilities. Gotti was no longer merely a young enforcer learning the ways of the streets. He was emerging as a strategist, a man who understood the balance between power and perception, and who could navigate the intricate dynamics of the Mafia with a steady hand. One of Gotti's first notable assignments involved overseeing the operation of small gambling networks scattered throughout Brooklyn and Queens. These ventures required careful management, as they involve both money and the loyalty of individuals who could become unstable if not handled properly. Gotti approached these operations with a combination of discipline and charisma. He ensured debts were collected, disputes were resolved, and operations ran smoothly, all while cultivating a reputation as someone reliable and intelligent. His ability to enforce rules without unnecessary confrontation set him apart, demonstrate that leadership was as much about influence as it was about force. During this period, Gotti also began to develop key alliances with the family, relationships that would prove crucial in his later rise. He aligned himself with influential figures who recognized his potential and were willing to guide him toward greater responsibility. These alliances were built on mutual respect, loyalty, and shared ambition. Gotti understood that in the world of organized crime, power was often determined not just by individual skill but by one's network of relationships. By fostering trust among mentors and peers, he was quietly constructing the foundation for a future in which he could exert significant influence. As his responsibilities grew, Gotti also faced the inevitable rivalries that accompanied advancement within the Gambino family. Not every member welcomed the rise of a young, ambitious figure in their midst. Some viewed him as a threat, while others were wary of his growing influence over crews and operations. Gotti, however, possessed a keen sense of timing and a talent for negotiation. He navigated these tensions with a mixture of tact and assertiveness, ensuring that potential conflicts were resolved before they escalated. This skill, learned from years of observing and participating in street-level conflicts, allowed him to maintain a balance between asserting authority and preserving alliances. One of the most significant aspects of Gotti's early operations was his understanding of the psychological elements of power. He realized that respect and fear were intertwined and that project confidence often mattered as much as the enforcement of rules. He cultivated an image that was calm, composed, and attentive, quality that inspired both loyalty and caution among those around him. By combining visible competence with a subtle sense of unpredictability, he created an aura that commanded attention without relying solely on intimidation. This approach would become a defining feature of his leadership style, earning him admiration and caution in equal measure. In addition to gambling and debt collection, Gotti became increasingly involved in loan sharking, a more lucrative but also riskier enterprise. The operations required careful attention to detail, a strong understanding of human behavior, and the ability to manage potential conflicts. Gotti excelled in these areas, ensuring that debts were enforced in a manner that maintained respect while avoiding unnecessary escalation. These experiences not only increased his influence within the family but also honed his skills in management, negotiation, and strategic thinking. Each successful operation reinforced his reputation as someone capable of handling complex assignments with intelligence and precision. During this time, Gotti also became aware of the importance of appearances. He understood that perception was often as important as action in the world of organized crime. By cultivating a polished personal image, dressing sharply, and projecting confidence, he distinguished himself from many contemporaries. This careful attention to presentation earned him the nickname the Dapper Don, a title that reflected both his style and the aura of authority he projected. His appearance was not merely superficial. It was a calculated aspect of influence, signaling control, discipline, and respectability even in the midst of criminal activity. Gotti's early operations were not without risk. Law enforcement was always present, observing patterns and seeking opportunities to intervene. Rival gangs and unpredictable associates added another layer of danger. Yet, Gotti's strategic approach allowed him to navigate these challenges successfully. He avoided unnecessary exposure, delegated tasks with precision, and maintained an understanding of who could be trusted. These decisions, though seemingly routine, demonstrated an intuitive grasp of leadership, risk management, and long-term planning. Each successful operation further solidified his reputation and prepared him for the more consequential moves that lay ahead. By the mid-1970s, John Gotti had established a reputation as a competent, reliable, and ambitious member of the Gambino family. He had successfully overseen small but significant criminal enterprises, managed relationships within the family, and navigated rivalries with tact and intelligence. His presence was felt not only in the operations he controlled, but also in the perception he cultivated a man capable of combining charisma, strategy, and discipline into a form of leadership that drew both respect and caution. It was during this period that Gotti began to lay the groundwork for what would eventually become his rise to power within the Gambino family. The skills he had developed, strategic thinking, negotiation, risk assessment, and the careful cultivation of relationships positioned him for more significant opportunities. Each operation, each interaction, and each decision contributed to the careful construction of a persona that would eventually command authority on a scale few had imagined. As the chapter of his early criminal operation concludes, it becomes clear that John Gotti's rise was deliberate, calculated, and rooted in a deep understanding of human behavior and organizational dynamics. He was no longer a street-level enforcer, but a figure whose presence commanded attention and whose actions influenced outcomes. The foundation of the Dapper Don was firmly in place, shaped by experience, intelligence, and ambition, preparing him for the pivotal moments that would define his legacy in the world of organized crime. As the 1970s progressed, John Gotti's presence within the Gambino crime family became increasingly significant. The years of apprenticeship, small-scale operations, and careful observation had prepared him for a new stage in his life, one where influence and authority mattered as much as the execution of orders. Gotti had grown into a man whose reputation preceded him, a figure capable of commanding respect and instilling caution without overt aggression. It was during this period that his first major strategic moves within the family began to take shape, setting the stage for his eventual ascent to power. Gotti's rise was neither sudden nor reckless. He understood the importance of timing and patience in the world of organized crime. While others relied on bold displays of violence to assert authority, often chose calculated actions that reinforced his reliability and skill. One of his earliest significant operations involved supervising crews tasked with resolving disputes, enforcing collections, and maintaining order within the family's network. These responsibilities required not only physical presence, but also judgment, diplomacy, and a keen understanding of human behavior. Gotti's ability to navigate these challenges earned him the trust of higher-ranking members and allowed him to expand his influence. During this period, Gotti also became associated with some of the family's early high-profile hits, events that were critical in consolidating power and demonstrating loyalty. These operations were executed with precision and planning, reflecting the combination of street smarts and strategic thinking that defined Gotti's approach. While he was careful to avoid unnecessary risk, he understood that showing decisiveness and reliability in such matters could elevate his standing within the organization. Each successful mission strengthened his reputation, both as a problem solver and as someone capable of taking decisive action when required. Relationships within the Gambino family continued to play a central role in Gotti's rise. He cultivated connections with influential figures who recognized his potential and were willing to provide guidance and support. At the same time, he was mindful of rivals and those who might view his ascent with suspicion. Gotti's approach was both cautious and strategic. He maintained loyalty to mentors while carefully navigating the ambitions of others, ensuring that alliances were solid and that potential conflicts were minimized. This awareness of internal dynamics became a hallmark of his leadership style, emphasizing intelligence and foresight over impulsive action. One of the defining aspects of Gotti's early prominence was his ability to manage perception. He understood that reputation was a form of currency within the Mafia, often determining access to opportunities and influence. By projecting confidence, maintaining a composed demeanor, and cultivating an image of reliability, Gotti enhanced his stature without attracting unnecessary attention from law enforcement or rivals. His presence became a signal to others he was capable, decisive, and someone whose authority could not easily be challenged. This careful cultivation of persona would later contribute to his enduring nickname, the Dapper Don, reflecting both style and strategic mastery. As his responsibilities expanded, Gotti also focused on the financial aspects of the family's operation. Gambling, loan sharking, and other enterprises required meticulous oversight, and Gotti demonstrated a keen aptitude for management. He understood the importance of balancing risk and reward, ensuring that operations were profitable while minimizing exposure. This combination of business acumen and street-level experience allowed him to operate with a level of sophistication that many of his peers lacked. It also reinforced his value to the family, marking him as someone capable of handling complex and high-stakes assignments. The challenges Gotti faced during this time were not limited to operations alone. He also contended with law enforcement scrutiny, rival factions, and internal tensions within the Gambino family. Each situation demanded careful calculation, strategic patience, and a readiness to act decisively when necessary. Gotti's approach was methodical. He observed patterns, assessed risks, and made decisions that balanced immediate needs with long-term objectives. This ability to think several steps ahead became a defining feature of his leadership, allowing him to navigate a dangerous environment with a combination of intelligence and presence that few could match. By the mid to late 1970s, Gotti's strategic moves had positioned him as a prominent figure within the family, someone who could influence decisions, manage operations, and earn the respect of both peers and superiors. His rise was the product of a careful blend of observation, experience, and calculated action. Each operation, each successful resolution of conflict, and each demonstration of reliability added another layer to his growing reputation. He was no longer simply a participant in the family's activities. He was becoming a leader in his own right. This period also saw Gotti refining the interpersonal skills that would define his public persona. He learned to inspire loyalty, manage disputes, and negotiate with skill and subtlety. He understood the human element of power, the importance of trust, perception, and reputation, and applied these principles consistently in his dealings. Whether managing crews, coordinating operations, or navigating alliances, Gotti approached each situation with a combination of patience, tact, and strategic foresight. These qualities distinguished him from others who relied solely on intimidation or brute force. As the decade drew to a close, John Gotti had completed a critical stage in his rise. He had established himself as a figure of influence, reliability, and strategic acumen within the Gambino family. The lessons learned from street-level operations, the experience gained from supervising crews, and the alliances cultivated with mentors had prepared him for the next phase of his journey. Each success reinforced his confidence and laid the groundwork for the ambitious steps that would eventually propel him to the apex of organized crime. The story of Gotti's early prominence is a testament to the combination of observation, strategy, and patience. His rise was not the result of impulsive ambition but of calculated moves, careful cultivation of relationships, and a deep understanding of both human behavior and organizational dynamics. These early years shaped the man who would become the Dapper Don, preparing him for the complex challenges and high-stakes decisions that lay ahead. As his journey continues, it is clear that John Gotti's ascent was built not only on courage and charisma but also on intelligence, strategy, and an unwavering sense of purpose within a world defined by loyalty, power, and reputation. By the late 1970s, John Gotti had firmly established himself as a capable and reliable figure within the Gambino crime family. The small operations, strategic alliances, and carefully executed early assignments had built a foundation for his growing influence. Yet, Gotti's ambition extended beyond mere competence. He sought a level of authority that would allow him to shape the organization, guide its decisions, and secure his own legacy within the world of organized crime. His period of consolidation was subtle, patient, and strategic, highlighting a side of Gotti that went far beyond brute force. Gotti's first priority was relationships both within the Gambino family and among allied figures in Brooklyn and Queens. He understood that loyalty, once established, was as valuable as money or power. Mentors who had guided him in his early years continued to advise and support him, recognizing his combination of intelligence, reliability, and charisma. At the same time, Gotti cultivated connections with peers and younger members, ensuring that he commanded respect across multiple layers of the organization. By carefully managing these relationships, he began to weave a network of influence that extended throughout the family's operation. At the heart of Gotti's consolidation strategy was his ability to manage perception. He knew that power within the Gambino family depended not just on authority or action, but on the way others perceived him. He cultivated an image of composed confidence, a man who could be relied upon to make fair and decisive decisions. This approach allowed him to command respect without unnecessary confrontation, and it made rivals think twice before challenging him. Even in high-pressure situations, Gotti maintained a calm demeanor, projecting an aura of control that both inspired loyalty and discouraged dissent. As his influence grew, Gotti began to take on more critical operations, overseeing multiple crews and coordinating complex activities. These assignments required not only logistical skill, but also judgment and diplomacy. He mediated disputes, resolved conflicts, and ensured that operations ran smoothly, often stepping in before minor disagreements could escalate. In doing so, Gotti demonstrated a capacity for leadership that extended beyond mere enforcement, highlighting his understanding of the human dynamics at play within the Mafia. Leadership, he realized, was about guidance, influence, and timing as much as it was about action. During this period, Gotti's reputation for decisiveness and reliability became increasingly known both inside and outside the Gambino family. He earned a reputation as someone who could handle sensitive matters with discretion, someone who could navigate dangerous situations with intelligence and tact. This reputation was critical. As the Underworld operated on a delicate balance of trust and fear, Gotti understood that to rise further, he needed to be seen as both competent and dependable, a figure whose judgment could be trusted even in high-stakes scenarios. Part of Gotti's consolidation involved understanding the family's internal hierarchies and rivalries. He observed the ambitions of other members, noting who might become obstacles and who could become allies. Gotti's ability to anticipate challenges and address them subtly allowed him to avoid conflicts that could weaken his position. In the world of organized crime, timing and perception were as critical as loyalty and strength, and Gotti's strategic mind allowed him to navigate these complexities with remarkable skill. Each successful negotiation or resolution reinforced his standing and expanded his influence within the family. Gotti's approach to power also involved demonstrating competence in financial operations. He oversaw gambling, loan sharking, and other revenue-generating enterprises, ensuring they operated efficiently and profitably. His attention to detail, combined with his ability to motivate crews and enforce rules without unnecessary conflict, made him an invaluable asset to the family. He understood that the stability and profitability of operations were essential to maintaining both influence and respect. This practical skill set, paired with his strategic thinking, distinguished him from many of his contemporaries who relied solely on intimidation or brute force. By carefully consolidating his influence, Gotti also began to prepare for the higher stakes of leadership. He observed the family's top figures, noting their decision-making processes, their methods of enforcement, and their approaches to maintaining alliances. These observations provided a roadmap for his own future ambitions. He learned the subtle art of combining respect and fear, the importance of timing and executing critical decisions, and the value of maintaining loyalty while neutralizing potential threats. These lessons, drawn from careful study and experience, were quietly setting the stage for his eventual rise to the top. Throughout this period, Gotti remained conscious of law enforcement scrutiny and rival factions. While his operations were becoming more significant, he continued to exercise discretion, understanding that exposure could be dangerous. By delegating tasks carefully, monitoring potential risks, and maintaining a calm and composed public presence. Gotti minimized threats from both authorities and competitors. His ability to balance ambition with caution further solidified his reputation as a calculated and capable leader. By the early 1980s, John Gotti had effectively consolidated his power within the Gambino family. He had cultivated a network of alliances, established a reputation for competence and reliability, demonstrated the strategic foresight necessary to navigate complex internal and external challenges. His growing influence was evident not only in the operations he managed but also in the respect and loyalty he commanded across multiple layers of the organization. This period of consolidation was essential in shaping the Dapper Don. Gotti's rise was not built solely on bold action or violence. It was the product of careful planning, strategic observation, and the consistent cultivation of relationships and reputation. By understanding the human dynamics, financial operations, and internal hierarchies of the family, he positioned himself to assume greater responsibilities and influence the future direction of the organization. As this chapter of Gotti's life concludes, it becomes clear that his rise was methodical and deliberate. He had moved from a competent enforcer to a figure whose authority and strategic skill could shape outcomes within the Gambino family. The lessons learned during this period: patience, observation, relationship building, and calculated decision-making would become the foundation of his legendary status as the Dapper Don. With his power consolidated and his influence extending through the family, John Gotti was poised for the pivotal events that would define his career and secure his place in history. By the early 1980s, John Gotti had firmly established himself as a trusted and capable member of the Gambino crime family. Years of strategic observation, carefully executed operations, and relationship building had positioned him as a rising force within the organization. Yet, the streets and boardrooms of Brooklyn and Queens were changing rapidly, and Gotti understood that to truly secure influence, he needed to be involved in high-profile operations that would demonstrate both his skill and his loyalty. These were the operations that would test his judgment, strategic thinking, and ability to maintain control under pressure. Gotti's early high-profile assignments often involved complex coordination between crews, the management of revenue streams, and the enforcement of family rules. Whether supervising gambling operations across multiple neighborhoods, ensuring loan sharking collections were executed efficiently, or mediate conflicts that threatened the stability of the family, Gotti approached every task with a meticulous combination of patience and decisiveness. These responsibilities required more than physical presence. They demanded intelligence, foresight, and the ability to anticipate the reactions of both allies and rivals. His success in these early high-stakes operations began to draw attention from senior members of the family. At this stage, Gotti also became involved in activities that carried higher risk, both legally and personally. Certain operations required the careful handling of rival factions, negotiation with independent operators, and enforcement of rules in situations where tensions could escalate quickly. Gotti's approach was always measured. He understood the power of perception and reputation, often using them as tools to assert authority without resorting to unnecessary conflict. His ability to inspire respect and caution in equal measure became a defining characteristic of his leadership style, a trait that distinguished him from others who relied solely on intimidation or physical dominance. The 1980s were a period of expansion and reorganization within the Gambino family. Gotti's increasing involvement in significant operations allowed him to develop a comprehensive understanding of the family's hierarchy and the flow of power within the organization. He observed patterns, identified potential weaknesses, and began to formulate strategies that would eventually place him in a position to influence the family's direction. These were subtle but deliberate moves, demonstrating his capacity for long-term planning and strategic thinking, qualities that would define his ascent to leadership. During this time, Gotti also solidified his relationships with key members of the family, understanding that alliances were crucial in a world defined by loyalty, hierarchy, and occasionally betrayal. He cultivated trust with mentors who had guided him early in his career, while simultaneously building connections with younger associates whose loyalty he would later rely upon. By carefully managing these relationships, Gotti created a network of influence that extended across multiple layers of the organization, ensuring that his position was not only secure but respected. Financial management remained a central component of Gotti's role. He oversaw gambling operations, loan sharking enterprises, and other revenue-generating ventures, ensuring that they remained profitable while minimizing exposure to law enforcement scrutiny. This attention to detail reinforced his reputation as a capable and strategic figure, someone who could be relied upon not only for enforcement, but also for the financial stability of the family. Gotti's combination of street-level experience, managerial skill, and strategic foresight allowed him to navigate increasingly complex operations with confidence. A crucial aspect of this period was Gotti's understanding of the importance of timing. In the world of organized crime, opportunity often appeared suddenly, and the ability to act decisively could make the difference between advancement and stagnation. Gotti demonstrated an exceptional ability to assess situations quickly, anticipate outcomes, and implement actions that aligned with long-term objectives. Whether coordinating operations, resolving disputes, or asserting influence, his decisions were always calculated to reinforce his authority and expand his influence within the Gambino family. Gotti's rising prominence inevitably attracted attention outside the family. Law enforcement agencies were increasingly aware of the Gambino family's activity, and rival criminal organizations were observing shifts in power dynamics. Gotti's strategic discretion, however, allowed him to maintain control without attracting excessive attention. He understood the delicate balance between visibility and exposure, projecting influence while minimizing unnecessary risk. This careful navigation of both internal and external pressures highlighted his tactical intelligence and ability to operate successfully in high-stakes environments. During this period, the nickname the Dapper Don became more than a casual reference to Gotti's sharp appearance. It reflected a carefully cultivated image, composed, confident, and commanding respect both through reputation and presence. He dressed meticulously, attended social gatherings with calculated visibility, carried himself with an air of authority that reinforced his growing influence. This persona complemented his operational abilities, creating a figure who was both admired and cautiously feared within the underworld. By the mid-1980s, John Gotti had transitioned from a rising operative to a significant influencer within the Gambino family. His involvement in high-profile operations, strategic relationship building, financial oversight, and careful management of perception had solidified his standing. Senior members recognized his competence and loyalty, while peers and subordinates acknowledged his authority and vision. Gotti's careful, methodical rise was now unmistakable. He was positioned to play a decisive role in the future of the organization, setting the stage for the pivotal events that would eventually place him at the top. This chapter of Gotti's life illustrates a key phase in his evolution, the shift from competence to influence. He had moved beyond executing orders to shaping outcomes, navigating complex dynamics, and positioning himself strategically within the family. The lessons learned from these early high-profile operations, the importance of timing, perception, loyalty, and discretion would continue to guide him as he pursued leadership. Gotti's journey was deliberate and calculated, built on a foundation of observation, strategic thinking, and the careful cultivation of relationships. As the story of the Dapper Don unfolds, it becomes clear that John Gotti's rise was never accidental. Every decision, every operation, and every interaction contributed to the careful construction of his authority. By engaging in high-profile operations and managing influence with precision, he solidified his role as a key player within the Gambino family, preparing for the dramatic steps that would eventually secure his position as one of the most famous figures in organized crime history. By the late 1980s, John Gotti had firmly established himself as a prominent and respected figure within the Gambino crime family. Years of strategic planning, careful relationship building, and successful operation had positioned him not just as a capable enforcer but as a leader in the making. The family itself was undergoing subtle shifts in power, and Gotti recognized that the time had come to secure a more formal and influential role. The path to becoming the acting boss was neither sudden nor reckless. It was a carefully orchestrated progression requiring intelligence, patience, and an acute understanding of human dynamics. Gotti's strategy began with consolidating the loyalty of key members within the family. He had spent years cultivating relationships with crews, associates, and younger operatives, ensuring that he had allies in positions critical to the family's operation. These alliances were not built merely on promises of advancement or financial gain. They were grounded in trust, respect, and the recognition of Gotti's competence. He understood that to ascend in the Gambino hierarchy, he needed both visibility and support, the combination of which would allow him to influence decisions and secure his place as a leader. During this period, the Gambino family was experiencing tension at the top. Long-time leadership had become increasingly vulnerable due to law enforcement attention, internal disputes, and the natural strains of maintaining control over a large and complex organization. Gotti observed these dynamics closely, identifying opportunities where his intervention could solidify his influence. He acted with a careful blend of patience and assertiveness, ensuring that any moves he made were calculated and supported by key allies. His approach was methodical. He was not seeking conflict for its own sake, but rather preparing the groundwork for a transition in leadership. Central to Gotti's strategy was his ability to project authority while maintaining discretion. He understood that the perception of control was as important as the exercise of power itself. By managing high-profile operations with precision, mediating disputes, and demonstrating reliability, Gotti reinforced his reputation as someone capable of leadership. His presence in meetings, social gatherings, and operational decisions became increasingly significant, sending subtle signals to both allies and rivals that he was prepared to assume a greater role. This careful cultivation of influence was critical, as abrupt or aggressive moves could have provoked resistance or conflict within the family. Gotti also focused on understanding the motivations and ambitions of those around him. He observed senior members, noting their strengths and weaknesses while assessing potential allies who could support his ascent. By carefully analyzing personalities and loyalties, he was able to position himself as a central figure capable of bridging divisions and managing conflicts effectively. His ability to read people, anticipate challenges, and act strategically allowed him to navigate the complex web of relationships within the Gambino family, reinforcing his growing stature and influence. The combination of operational skill, strategic foresight, and interpersonal intelligence set Gotti apart from many contemporaries. While others relied heavily on intimidation or displays of force, he emphasized planning, discretion, and the subtle exercise of authority. His leadership style was both practical and psychological. He understood the importance of loyalty, fear, and respect, and he balanced these elements to create an aura of control and competence. This approach not only solidified his support among allies, but also discouraged potential rivals from challenging his position. Financial acumen remained an essential part of Gotti's rise. He continued to oversee revenue-generating operations, ensuring that gambling, loan sharking, and other enterprises remained profitable and efficient. This attention to detail and consistency further enhanced his reputation, demonstrating that he was not only a capable strategist, but also a reliable manager of the family's resources. Allies and mentors alike recognized the value of having someone with such a combination of operational and financial competence poised for leadership. During this period, Gotti also had to navigate law enforcement scrutiny, which added another layer of complexity to his rise. He was careful to maintain discretion, delegating tasks and monitoring operations to minimize exposure. His ability to balance ambition with caution, visibility with subtlety, allowed him to operate effectively in an environment of constant risk. The careful orchestration of his ascent demonstrated a level of strategic thinking and foresight that few in the organization could match. By the late 1980s, John Gotti had successfully positioned himself as the acting boss of the Gambino crime family. This transition was the result of years of patient planning, skillful management of relationships, and consistent demonstration of competence and authority. His influence extended across multiple layers of the organization, and his presence commanded respect both within the family and among allied criminal enterprises. Gotti had moved from being a rising operative to a central figure capable of shaping the direction and decisions of one of the most powerful crime families in the country. The role of acting boss was not without its challenges. Gotti had to manage rivalries, maintain financial stability, and assert authority in a way that balanced firmness with diplomacy. Each decision required careful consideration, as mistakes could weaken his position or provoke internal conflict. Yet, his years of preparation, observation, and strategic action had equipped him with the skills necessary to navigate these challenges. He approached each situation with patience, calculation, and an understanding of both immediate and long-term consequences. By consolidating power, building loyalty, and projecting authority, Gotti had effectively secured his path to leadership. His rise to acting boss was not merely a result of ambition. It was the culmination of years of strategic development, careful observation, and consistent demonstration of competence and influence. Every operation, every alliance, and every decision contributed to the careful orchestration of his ascent, preparing him for the final steps that would define his role as the Dapper Don. As this chapter closes, it becomes evident that John Gotti's path to power was deliberate and calculated. He had transformed from a capable street operative into a strategic leader, someone capable of managing complex operations, guiding alliances, and navigating the intricate dynamics of the Gambino family. The foundation of his legendary status was firmly in place, built on intelligence, patience, and an unwavering understanding of the human and organizational dynamics that define power. With his position as acting boss secured, Gotti was poised to make the decision that would ultimately cement his legacy in the annals of organized crime history. By the late 1980s, John Gotti had effectively positioned himself at the pinnacle of the Gambino crime family's operations. His years of careful planning, strategic observation, and steady rise through the ranks had culminated in a moment that would define his career: the transition from acting boss to the official head of one of New York's most powerful crime families. The streets of Brooklyn, once the proving ground of a street-smart youth, had now become the stage on which Gotti's ambitions would be fully realized. The Gambino family, like any large criminal organization, operated on a delicate balance of loyalty, fear, and influence. Leadership was not merely about controlling operations, it was about managing relationships, projecting authority, and ensuring stability in a world where power was constantly contested. Gotti had spent years cultivating this balance, quietly building alliances, understanding rivalries, and demonstrating reliability at every turn. By the time he was poised to become boss, he had a network of loyal supporters and a reputation that demanded attention from both allies and adversaries. Gotti's ascent was also a response to the vulnerabilities of the previous leadership. The Gambino family's former boss, Paul Castellano, had been increasingly isolated, focused more on business ventures and legal legitimacy than on the gritty realities of street-level control. This created an opportunity for a figure like Gotti, who understood the streets, the crews, and the enforcement mechanisms that kept the family cohesive. Gotti recognized that influence required both respect and decisiveness, and he was prepared to act in a way that would secure loyalty while neutralizing potential opposition. Central to Gotti's rise was his careful orchestration of internal support. He had spent years cultivating trust with key captains, soldiers, and associates, ensuring that he had allies in positions critical to the family's operation. These relationships were grounded in competence, loyalty, and respect, rather than intimidation alone. Gotti understood that true leadership required more than fear. It required a network of people willing to act decisively in alignment with his vision. His ability to identify potential allies and neutralize threats quietly allowed him to consolidate power efficiently. The pivotal moment in Gotti's ascent involved a carefully calculated intervention within the family's hierarchy. While the details of internal Gambino decisions were often shrouded in secrecy, it is clear that Gotti acted decisively, leveraging both timing and alliances to secure his position. His ability to read the dynamics of loyalty, ambition, and fear ensured that he faced minimal resistance as he transitioned into leadership. The move was not impulsive, it was the result of years of observation, planning, and strategic positioning, demonstrating Gotti's understanding of organizational dynamics and human behavior. Once Gotti assumed leadership, his first priorities were clear: consolidate power, stabilize operations, and assert authority in a way that reinforced both loyalty and respect. He oversaw the management of gambling operations, loan sharking networks, and other revenue-generating ventures, ensuring that the family's financial stability was secure. This attention to operational detail reinforced his image as a competent and capable leader, someone who could be trusted with both enforcement and administration simultaneously. Gotti addressed potential rivalries within the family. Leadership in the Mafia was rarely uncontested, and the emergence of a new boss always prompted evaluation from those who might benefit from disruption. Gotti's approach was strategic. He used a combination of personal influence, calculated intimidation, and negotiation to neutralize threats while maintaining the cohesion of the family. By demonstrating both decisiveness and fairness, he reinforced loyalty and minimized the risk of internal dissent. This delicate balance of firmness and diplomacy became a hallmark of his leadership style. Gotti's public persona also played a critical role in establishing authority. Known for his sharp dress, composed demeanor, and commanding presence, he projected an image of control that extended beyond his immediate circle. This visibility reinforced his reputation both within the family and among rival organizations. It signaled that the Dapper Don was a figure to be respected, one capable of managing the complexities of leadership with intelligence and poise. The cultivation of image, combined with operational competence, created a perception of authority that few could challenge. At the same time, Gotti remained aware of law enforcement scrutiny. As boss, he was a target for federal investigation, and the stakes of exposure were higher than ever. He exercised caution, delegated operational responsibilities effectively, and maintained discretion in all visible action. The combination of strategic visibility and careful management of risk allowed Gotti to operate successfully while minimizing vulnerabilities, demonstrating his understanding of both human and institutional dynamics. The transition to leadership also required Gotti to engage in long-term strategic planning. He understood that the family's future depended on both financial stability and the loyalty of its members. Decisions regarding operations, personnel, and alliances were made with foresight, anticipating potential challenges and opportunities. His leadership style emphasized the importance of observation, assessment, and calculated action, ensuring that the Gambino family remained both cohesive and resilient under his guidance. By the time Gotti was fully recognized as boss, he had successfully transformed from a street-smart youth into the authoritative head of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. His rise was the result of years of strategic preparation, careful cultivation of relationships, and consistent demonstration of competence and reliability. Gotti's leadership combined charisma, intelligence, and decisiveness, establishing him as a figure both respected and feared within the underworld. This chapter in John Gotti's life marks a defining moment, the ascent to full leadership. His ability to consolidate power, navigate rivalries, manage operations, and maintain visibility, while exercising discretion, demonstrates the careful orchestration behind his rise. The Dapper Don was now firmly in control, poised to influence the direction of the Gambino family and leave a lasting imprint on organized crime. The journey from street-level enforcer to boss was complete, yet the challenges of leadership were only beginning. As this chapter closes, it becomes evident that John Gotti's rise to boss was deliberate, calculated, and rooted in an exceptional understanding of human and organizational dynamics. His leadership was built on a foundation of loyalty, strategic alliance, operational competence, and the careful management of perception. The stage was set for the next phase of his story, one in which his decisions, influence, and notoriety would capture the attention of both the criminal world and the wider public, defining his legacy as the Dapper Don. As John Gotti stepped fully into his role as the boss of the Gambino crime family, the streets of New York and the inner workings of organized crime shifted subtly around him. Leadership within such an organization was not simply a matter of enforcing rules or asserting authority. It required strategic foresight, careful management of loyalty, and the ability to project both respect and fear simultaneously. Gotti understood this balance intuitively, having spent years learning the rhythms of the underworld and cultivating relationships that would now serve him in a position of absolute influence. One of Gotti's earliest priorities as boss was to consolidate his authority over the family's operations. He was aware that the transition of power could create uncertainty among crews and associates, and he moved deliberately to establish clarity. Gotti maintained oversight over gambling, loan sharking, and other revenue-generating enterprises, ensuring that operations ran efficiently and profitably. At the same time, he delegated responsibilities to trusted captains, signaling that loyalty and competence would be rewarded. This careful balance of direct involvement and strategic delegation reinforced his leadership while maintaining the operational stability of the organization. Gotti's leadership style was notable for its combination of decisiveness and charisma. Unlike some of his predecessors who relied primarily on intimidation or isolation, Gotti actively cultivated relationships within the family. He spent time listening to captains and soldiers, understanding their perspectives, and mediating disputes when necessary. By combining accessibility with authority, he created an atmosphere in which loyalty was earned through respect and competence rather than fear alone. This approach helped to unify the family during a period of potential instability and positioned Gotti as a leader who was both admired and cautiously feared. Early in his tenure, Gotti made several high-profile decisions that reinforced his reputation. He addressed lingering disputes between crews with swift but measured interventions, demonstrating that he was both aware of operational dynamics and willing to act decisively when necessary. These actions were carefully calculated to maintain order without creating unnecessary conflict, illustrating his ability to navigate complex human dynamics within the organization. His decisions were respected not only because of the authority he held, but also because of the perception of fairness and strategic intelligence that accompanied them. Financial oversight remained a critical component of Gotti's early leadership. He recognized that the family's strength depended on the stability and profitability of its operations. Under his guidance, gambling operations were managed with precision, loan sharking collections were enforced with discretion, and illegal ventures were coordinated to maximize revenue, while minimizing exposure to law enforcement scrutiny. Gotti's attention to the financial health of the organization underscored his dual focus on operational control and long-term sustainability, a quality that distinguished him from many contemporary leaders in the underworld. Gotti also understood the importance of reputation and perception beyond the immediate circle of the Gambino family. He carefully cultivated his public persona as the Dapper Don, a sharp-dressed, composed, and confident figure whose presence commanded attention. This image served multiple purposes. It reinforced loyalty among associates, instilled caution in rivals, and subtly signaled competence and authority to observers both inside and outside the criminal world. Gotti's meticulous attention to appearance was not vanity, it was a strategic element of leadership, enhancing the psychological impact of his authority. Despite his rising notoriety, Gotti exercised caution regarding law enforcement and public exposure. He maintained operational discretion, carefully delegating tasks ensuring that sensitive activities were managed with minimal risk. This strategic awareness allowed him to operate successfully while avoiding excessive attention, a delicate balance that required constant vigilance. Gotti's ability to combine visibility with discretion demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of both human and institutional dynamics, allowing him to maintain control while minimizing vulnerabilities. A key aspect of Gotti's early tenure as boss was his handling of potential rivalries. Leadership in the Gambino family was rarely uncontested, and the emergence of a new boss often prompted scrutiny from ambitious members. Gotti addressed these dynamics with calculated diplomacy, leveraging relationships, alliances, and influence to neutralize threats before they escalated. By demonstrating both firmness and fairness, he reinforced loyalty, minimized internal dissent, and established a clear chain of command that strengthened the cohesion of the family. During this period, Gotti also began to expand his influence into strategic decision-making. Regarding alliances with other crime families and independent criminal enterprises, he evaluated potential partnerships carefully, assessing both financial benefits and long-term loyalty. His approach combined negotiation, calculated risk-taking, and careful observation of behavior and reputation. By building these connections thoughtfully, Gotti ensured that the Gambino family maintained influence beyond its traditional territories, enhancing both its financial strength and strategic position in the broader underworld. Gotti's combination of strategic oversight, operational competence, and charismatic leadership quickly distinguished him as a figure whose authority was both respected and feared. He was not simply enforcing rules. He was shaping the culture and direction of the organization. His early decisions set the tone for his tenure, demonstrating a balance of decisiveness, fairness, and strategic foresight that became the hallmark of his leadership. Associates recognized that loyalty to Gotti was rewarded, while challenges to his authority carried clear consequences. By the end of this early phase of leadership, Gotti had successfully established himself as more than just a boss in title. He was a figure whose presence, decisions, and influence shaped the Gambino family's operations and culture. His ability to balance operational oversight, financial management, relationship building, and public perception demonstrated a rare combination of intelligence, strategy, and charisma. The foundation of his legendary status as the Dapper Don was firmly in place, built on a careful orchestration of authority, influence, and foresight. As this chapter closes, it becomes evident that John Gotti's early decisions as boss were not simply reactions to circumstance. They were deliberate actions designed to reinforce loyalty, consolidate power, and ensure the long-term stability of the Gambino family. His leadership style, decisive yet charismatic, strategic yet practical, would define the organization's operations for years to come. The Dapper Don had not only secured his position, but had also begun to leave an indelible mark on the world of organized crime, setting the stage for the notoriety and influence that would become synonymous with his name. With John Gotti firmly established as the boss of the Gambino crime family, the streets of New York quietly acknowledged the presence of a new leader whose influence extended beyond mere title. Leadership in the Mafia was never secure, and Gotti understood that his authority would be continuous, tested by rivals within the family, ambitious associates, and competing organizations. Maintaining dominance required more than reputation or force. It required strategic intelligence, psychological acuity, and a subtle but unmistakable exercise of power. From the beginning, Gotti faced the challenge of consolidating his power among captains and crews who were accustomed to a decentralized approach under previous leadership. Some members were loyal to former bosses or wary of the Dapper Don's rising prominence. Gotti addressed these potential tensions with a combination of tact, diplomacy, and demonstration of decisiveness. He took time to listen to grievances, mediate disputes, and assert his authority without provoking unnecessary confrontation. By balancing firmness with fairness, he reinforced loyalty while ensuring that those who resisted understood the consequences of dissent. Gotti's approach to rivalries was as much psychological as it was operational. He understood the human element of power, fear, respect, and perception often mattered as much as action. Through careful observation, he identified those who posed genuine threats and those who could be guided into support. He cultivated alliances by rewarding loyalty and competence, while neutralizing opposition quietly and efficiently. This subtle, calculated strategy allowed him to consolidate power without destabilizing the family or drawing unwanted attention from law enforcement. High-profile Gambino operations became a key instrument in asserting dominance. Gotti oversaw gambling, loan sharking, and other enterprises, ensuring they were both profitable and orderly. Success in these ventures reinforced his reputation as a competent and reliable leader, demonstrating that he could manage complex operations with precision. At the same time, the visible success of loyal crews under his direction served as a clear signal to rivals Gotti was in control, and those who aligned with him would thrive, while those who challenged him risked isolation or worse. The broader landscape of organized crime in New York also required Gotti to navigate relationships with other families. Alliances and rivalries outside the Gambino organization had the potential to impact his internal power. Gotti approached these interactions with strategic foresight, assessing both the opportunities and the threats inherent in negotiations with other bosses. By demonstrating intelligence, composure, and calculated decisiveness, he ensured that the Gambino family remained influential while avoiding unnecessary conflict. These external relationships further solidified his authority within the family as members recognized the advantage of having a boss capable of navigating complex criminal networks. Internally, Gotti maintained a disciplined approach to hierarchy and loyalty. He was meticulous in ensuring that rules were respected, orders were followed, and disputes were resolved promptly. His ability to combine operational oversight with psychological insight made him a formidable presence. Soldiers and captains alike understood that loyalty to Gotti was both prudent and necessary for survival and success. This careful balance of respect, fear, and admiration became a defining feature of his consolidation strategy, ensuring that challenges to his authority were minimal and short-lived. Gotti's personal charisma also played a critical role. Unlike many figures in organized crime, who relied purely on intimidation, Gotti cultivated relationships and a presence that inspired loyalty. He was known for generosity toward those who served him faithfully, whether through financial rewards, opportunities for advancement, or personal attention. At the same time, he maintained an aura of unpredictability that reminded associates and rivals alike that his authority was absolute. This combination of approachability and controlled intimidation became one of his most effective tools in managing rivalries. Law enforcement scrutiny added another layer of complexity to his consolidation efforts. Gotti's prominence made him a target for federal investigations, and he had to manage both internal authority and external exposure simultaneously, delegating responsibilities effectively, maintaining operational discretion, and monitoring communications allowed him to minimize vulnerabilities while continuing to exercise control. This dual focus, asserting dominance internally while managing risk externally, highlighted Gotti's strategic acumen and distinguished him from leaders who relied solely on brute force. During this period, a number of potential rivalries were tested. Some captains and soldiers questioned Gotti's decisions or contemplated challenges to his authority. Each situation required careful assessment. Gotti approached these tensions with patience, calculating the best way to maintain loyalty and minimize risk. He used a combination of persuasion, subtle intimidation, and selective enforcement of consequences to neutralize threats before they escalated. By managing these internal conflicts decisively but discreetly, he strengthened his position without creating fractures in the family's structure. Gotti's consolidation of power extended beyond immediate operational control. He was keenly aware that perception and reputation were as critical as authority. By maintaining a composed, confident, and visible presence, he reinforced his position as the unquestioned leader. His image as the Dapper Don, meticulously dressed, poised, and assertive, was not merely cosmetic. It was an essential element of psychological influence, signaling that he was both competent and formidable. The combination of operational control, strategic foresight, and image management created a foundation of authority that was difficult to challenge. By the early 1990s, Gotti's consolidation was largely complete. He had neutralized internal rivals, secured loyalty among key members, and established a reputation that extended across the underworld. His leadership style, decisive, strategic, and psychologically astute, allowed him to manage both the complexities of the Gambino family's operations and the challenges of external scrutiny. Associates recognized his competence and authority, while rivals were cautious in their interaction, understanding that Gotti's influence was far-reaching and his judgment precise. The chapter of managing rivals and consolidating power illustrates the subtle, strategic side of Gotti's leadership. His rise was not dependent solely on bold actions or dramatic violence, but on patient observation, calculated alliances, and the consistent application of influence. Through careful management of human dynamics, operational oversight, and strategic perception, Gotti secured his dominance and positioned the Gambino family for both stability and continued influence. As this chapter closes, it becomes clear that John Gotti's ability to consolidate power was a defining feature of his career. By combining intelligence, psychological insight, operational skill, charisma, he created a foundation of authority that few could challenge. The Dapper Don's reputation, carefully cultivated and decisively enforced, ensured that the Gambino family remained cohesive and loyal under his leadership. His mastery of both human and organizational dynamics would continue to shape his legacy, establishing him as one of the most influential and formidable figures in organized crime history. As John Gotti's prominence within the Gambino crime family solidified, so too did the scrutiny of law enforcement. By the early 1990s, federal authorities were increasingly focused on dismantling organized crime in New York, and Gotti, as the visible and influential leader of one of the most powerful families, naturally became a target. The challenges he faced were no longer limited to rivalries within the Mafia. He now had to navigate the complexities of legal pressure, surveillance, and federal investigations, all while maintaining control over the family's operations and reputation. Gotti's notoriety made him both a symbol and a target. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and federal prosecutors, had made it a priority to indict and convict high-ranking mob figures. Gotti's lifestyle, public visibility, and media attention created both opportunities and risks, while his image as the Dapper Don reinforced his authority and charisma within the criminal world. It also made him a high-profile figure for federal investigators eager to make an example of him. This tension between reputation and vulnerability would define much of Gotti's strategy during this period. One of Gotti's most notable early strategies was discretion in communication and delegation of tasks. Understanding that direct involvement in certain operations could be used as evidence against him, he increasingly relied on trusted captains and crews to carry out activities, while he maintained oversight in ways that were less legally traceable. This approach required both trust and discipline, ensuring that orders were executed efficiently without creating opportunities for exposure. By carefully balancing operational control with discretion, Gotti continued to assert authority while minimizing legal risk. Federal indictments and investigations, however, were unavoidable. Gotti faced multiple legal challenges as authorities attempted to link him to criminal enterprises ranging from loan sharking to racketeering. These investigations often relied on surveillance, informants, and meticulous tracking of financial activities. Gotti's approach combined caution with calculated risk-taking. He was known to adapt quickly, altering routines, modifying operational structure, and monitoring the behavior of associates to reduce vulnerabilities. His ability to anticipate law enforcement strategies reflected a deep understanding of both human behavior and institutional procedures. Despite these pressures, Gotti maintained an outward image of composure and control. He continued to appear in public, attend social gatherings, and project the charisma that had become synonymous with his nickname, the Dapper Don. This visibility served multiple purposes. It reassured loyal associates, reinforced his image as a strong leader, and subtly signaled that federal investigations would not intimidate him or weaken his authority. Gotti's careful management of public perception highlighted the psychological dimension of his leadership, blending resilience with strategy in the face of mounting legal challenges. Internal loyalty became even more critical during this period. Associates were aware that any lapse in discretion or loyalty could have serious consequences, both legally and operationally. Gotti emphasized the importance of trust, ensuring that crews understood the stakes and the value of careful adherence to operational protocols. He reinforced these lessons through both guidance and, when necessary, decisive action. By maintaining a disciplined and loyal network, Gotti mitigated some of the risks posed by law enforcement scrutiny while continuing to operate effectively across the family's enterprises. One of the notable aspects of this period was Gotti's response to indictments and legal threats. Unlike some predecessors who might retreat into obscurity or seek influence, Gotti remained actively engaged in the family's affairs. He was strategic in how he responded publicly and privately, using legal battles as opportunities to reinforce his image and project resilience. This approach demonstrated both courage and calculation, ensuring that authority was maintained even in the face of external pressure. The involvement of informants and cooperating witnesses posed additional challenges. Federal investigators relied on insider testimony to build cases against mob figures, and Gotti recognized the need to maintain strict discipline and oversight within the organization. His leadership emphasized caution, loyalty, and careful management of sensitive operations, ensuring that the risk of betrayal was minimized. The ability to maintain cohesion in the face of potential internal and external threats was a defining feature of Gotti's strategy during this period. Financial operations were also adapted to reduce exposure. Gotti oversaw adjustments to loan sharking, gambling, and other revenue-generating activities to maintain profitability while limiting detectable trails. Delegation to trusted captains allowed operations to continue efficiently while minimizing the direct link between the boss and potentially incriminating activities. This balance of control and legal awareness reflected Gotti's sophisticated understanding of both the criminal and legal environments in which he operated. Despite the increasing pressure, Gotti's reputation within the underworld remained largely intact. Associates continued to respect his decisiveness, strategic intelligence, and charisma. Even as federal investigations intensified, his ability to inspire loyalty, project authority, and maintain operational control ensured that the Gambino family remained cohesive. This period illustrates the delicate balance required of a leader operating under dual pressures, internal management and external legal scrutiny. By the early 1990s, the pattern was clear. Gotti had successfully navigated a period of heightened federal attention without losing authority or cohesion within the family. His strategies, careful delegation, disciplined oversight, maintenance of loyalty, and projection of composed authority enabled him to operate effectively despite the growing legal threats. The balance between visibility and discretion, charisma and caution, authority, and adaptability defined his leadership during this challenging period. As this chapter closes, it becomes evident that John Gotti's ability to maintain control under federal scrutiny was a testament to his strategic intelligence and psychological insight. He managed both the operational demands of leadership and the external pressures of law enforcement with a combination of foresight, adaptability, and decisiveness. The Dapper Don's legacy as a masterful leader was reinforced not only by his rise to power, but also by his ability to navigate the challenges of legal exposure and scrutiny, maintaining dominance in an increasingly complex and dangerous environment. By the early 1990s, John Gotti's presence as the head of the Gambino crime family was impossible to ignore. His sharp suits, composed demeanor, and commanding presence had earned him the nickname the Dapper Don, and his reputation had spread far beyond the neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Queens. Yet with fame came danger. Law enforcement scrutiny had intensified, and federal agencies were determined to bring the flamboyant boss to justice. Gotti now faced the dual challenge of maintaining control over his organization while navigating a growing legal storm that threatened both his freedom and the stability of the family. The media played an unexpected role in amplifying Gotti's notoriety. Journalists, captivated by his charisma, audacious public appearance, and bold demeanor, provided national coverage of his activities. Gotti's image was broadcast to millions, turning a criminal leader into a public figure whose charm and defiance drew fascination. This visibility was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it reinforced his authority within the Gambino family and inspired loyalty among associates who admired his boldness. On the other hand, it placed him squarely in the crosshairs of law enforcement, providing federal prosecutors with a persona to target and public momentum to leverage in their cases. Federal authorities, including the FBI and U.S. attorneys, intensified their investigation. They employed surveillance, wiretaps, informants, and undercover operations to gather evidence, linking Gotti to criminal activities such as racketeering, loan sharking, extortion, and murder. Each operation was meticulously designed to circumvent his carefully maintained discretion. The pressure was relentless, and Gotti understood that a single misstep could unravel years of careful leadership. His ability to navigate this high-stakes environment relied on both intuition, strategy, balancing operational control with cautious avoidance of exposure. Internally, Gotti continued to enforce loyalty and discipline. Associates understood the stakes. Betrayal or misstep could lead not only to prosecution, but also to retaliation within the family. Gotti emphasized the importance of discretion, using a combination of oversight, trust, and, when necessary, intimidation to ensure compliance. Crews and captains who had been loyal during his rise were now tested under the intense scrutiny of federal cases. Maintaining cohesion and confidence among them was critical, as even a single leak could be devastating. Gotti's leadership during this period was defined by vigilance, calculate, risk-taking, and careful psychological management of those around him. The escalation of federal cases brought both procedural and strategic challenges. Prosecutors aimed to dismantle the Gambino family's hierarchy by securing testimony from informants and cooperating witnesses. This tactic put pressure not only on Gotti but also on his inner circle, forcing him to anticipate potential betrayals and reinforce loyalty. He responded with a combination of strategic communication, selective delegation, and the management of perception. Associates were reassured by his calm decisiveness, and rivals were reminded that challenging his authority carried consequences. This balance of reassurance and warning allowed Gotti to maintain control amid the mounting legal storm. High-profile operations continued to be central to Gotti's strategy. While federal investigators sought evidence against him, he ensured that revenue streams such as gambling and loan sharking continued to operate efficiently. Delegation was critical. Trusted captains executed tasks under his supervision, while Gotti monitored outcomes indirectly. This approach minimized direct exposure while maintaining operational authority. It also reinforced the perception of Gotti as a capable, hands-on leader who remained fully engaged despite increasing legal pressure. The combination of media attention and federal scrutiny created a unique environment. Gotti's public persona amplified both admiration and risk. He projected confidence and control, attending events, interacting with associates, and maintaining a visible presence that reinforced his authority. This careful balance of visibility and caution demonstrated an acute awareness of the psychological and symbolic aspects of leadership. Associates drew confidence from his composure. Rivals exercised caution, and law enforcement faced the challenge of a highly aware and strategically minded target. Gotti's response to the mounting cases was calculated and deliberate. He adjusted routines, refined operational practices, and ensured that communications were secure. Associates who displayed loyalty were rewarded, while potential threats were neutralized through persuasion, reassignment, or, if necessary, intimidation. These strategies reflected an understanding of both human behavior and organizational management. By maintaining a controlled environment within the family, Gotti preserved authority while navigating external threats. Despite the increasing pressure, Gotti's reputation within the underworld remained intact. His decisiveness, strategic intelligence, and ability to maintain order under scrutiny reinforced loyalty and deterred challenges. The Dapper Don had not only survived early federal investigations, but had also used his visibility to cement his status as a leader who could endure extraordinary pressure. The Gambino family, while under threat, remained cohesive and operationally strong, a testament to Gotti's leadership acumen. As the federal cases escalated, the stakes grew higher. Gotti's decisions during this period demonstrated a careful balance between operational control, public perception, and legal risk management. His ability to remain composed, project authority, and inspire loyalty became increasingly crucial. Each decision was a test of both intelligence and patience, as he navigated a landscape where a single error could have profound consequences. By the mid-1990s, Gotti's notoriety had reached its peak. Media fascination, federal investigations, and public attention combined to create a scenario in which his every action was scrutinized. Yet, through strategic oversight, psychological insight, and disciplined leadership, he maintained control over the Gambino family and preserved his authority. This chapter of his life illustrates the complex interplay between power, visibility, and risk. Gotti's ability to manage both the operational and psychological dimensions of leadership under federal scrutiny solidified his legacy as one of the most formidable and charismatic figures in organized crime. As this chapter closes, it becomes evident that John Gotti's rise and continued dominance were not simply products of ambition or force. They were the result of careful planning, strategic foresight, and the consistent application of psychological intelligence. The escalation of federal cases, combined with public notoriety, tested every aspect of his leadership, yet the Dapper Don remained resilient. His capacity to navigate this pressure with skill, composure, and authority ensured that both his reputation and control over the Gambino family endured, setting the stage for the pivotal events that would define the final chapters of his story. By the mid-1990s, John Gotti's life had entered a phase where the consequences of his visibility and notoriety could no longer be avoided. Federal authorities had intensified their efforts, gathering evidence through wiretaps, informants, and undercover operations. The aim was clear: to indict, prosecute, and convict the Dapper Don on a series of serious charges ranging from racketeering to murder. The Gambino family, while loyal, faced unprecedented scrutiny, and Gotti himself prepared to confront one of the most significant challenges of his life, facing the full weight of the law in a courtroom. The indictment was a culmination of years of federal investigations that had meticulously tracked the Gambino family's operation. Prosecutors assembled evidence intended to demonstrate Gotti's central role in criminal activity, including extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and orchestrated violence. The charges reflected not only his operational oversight but also the reputation he had cultivated as a visible and influential leader. Gotti's previous confidence and public persona, which had reinforced his authority within the family, now became points of focus for prosecutors seeking to portray him as a dangerous and audacious figure. As the courtroom proceedings began, Gotti's demeanor remained composed. Known for his charismatic and poised presence, he carried the same confidence into the trial that had defined him on the streets and in criminal circles. This composure was more than appearance. It reflected years of navigating high-stakes situations with intelligence and patience. He was fully aware that the trial was not only a legal battle, but also a contest of perception, how he presented himself, interacted with attorneys, and maintained authority, both in and out of the courtroom, would have lasting consequences. The trial itself was complex, involving multiple charges and numerous witnesses. Prosecutors relied heavily on testimony from former associates and cooperate witnesses, some of whom had intimate knowledge of the family's operation. Each witness represented a potential threat, and Gotti's legal team had to anticipate strategy aimed at discrediting him, undermining loyalty, and demonstrating criminal culpability. The courtroom became a stage for a psychological contest as much as a legal proceeding, with Gotti projecting calm authority, even as evidence and testimony were presented against him. Media attention during the trial added another layer of complexity. The Dapper Don was once again at the center of public fascination, and every action, comment, and expression was analyzed and broadcast. This scrutiny had the potential to influence public perception and even jury sentiment. Gotti's ability to maintain composure in this highly visible environment reinforced his personal brand of leadership and resilience. He projected an image of defiance and control, signaling to both supporters and adversaries that he remained steadfast despite the mounting pressure. Inside the courtroom, the dynamics were intricate. Attorneys employed legal tactics designed to challenge credibility, introduce doubt, and highlight inconsistencies. Gotti, accustomed to high-stakes negotiation and strategic planning, understood the significance of each move. He relied on careful preparation, coordination with his legal team, and strategic communication to respond effectively. His ability to navigate the procedural and psychological demands of the trial was a reflection of the same intelligence and foresight that had guided his rise within the Gambino family. The testimony of former associates was particularly challenging. Witnesses provided detailed accounts of operations, interactions, and decisions that implicated Gotti in criminal activities. The prosecution sought to establish a clear chain of command linking him to each act, aiming to demonstrate leadership and accountability. Gotti's defense team worked to counter these narratives, emphasizing credibility issues, inconsistencies, and the absence of direct evidence tying him to certain crimes. The trial became a battle of perception as much as fact, highlighting the complex interplay of law, reputation, and strategy in high-profile criminal proceedings. Despite the intense pressure, Gotti maintained his leadership stance. Even as legal proceedings unfolded, he continued to oversee operations within the Gambino family indirectly, relying on loyal captains and soldiers to execute his directives. This ability to retain control while facing federal prosecution demonstrated a remarkable level of organizational intelligence. Associates recognized that their boss remained in command, capable of guiding decisions and maintaining cohesion under extraordinary circumstances. Gotti's authority was reinforced not through direct intimidation in the courtroom, but through the continued demonstration of competence, strategy, and resilience. The trial also underscored the intersection of law enforcement strategy and human behavior. Prosecutors aimed to exploit fear, uncertainty, and loyalty pressures within the Gambino family to secure convictions. Gotti's response relied on his deep understanding of these dynamics. By maintaining loyalty among key members, projecting confidence, and responding strategically to legal and procedural challenges, he mitigated the potential impact of these pressures. The courtroom became a microcosm of the battles he had faced for years in the streets, requiring the same combination of psychological insight, tactical intelligence, and composed authority. As the proceedings progressed, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every witness, every piece of evidence, and every statement had implications for the outcome. Gotti's presence and conduct were closely observed by both supporters and opponents, reflecting the dual nature of his trials: legal scrutiny and public spectacle. His ability to manage these overlapping pressures was a testament to his strategic intelligence and psychological acumen. The Dapper Don's legacy as a leader capable of navigating both criminal and institutional challenges was being tested in a very public forum. By the end of this chapter, the narrative of John Gotti in the courtroom illustrates the profound challenges of leadership under extreme pressure. He faced not only the law, but also public scrutiny and the potential fracturing of his organization. Through composure, strategy, and careful management of perception and loyalty, he navigated the complexities of the trial while maintaining control over his family's operations. This period was a defining moment, highlighting the resilience, intelligence, and strategic skill that had characterized his rise and cemented his reputation as the Dapper Don. As John Gotti's trial progressed, the courtroom became a stage where the high stakes of leadership, loyalty, and public perception played out in intense detail. The Dapper Don, who had built his reputation on charisma, strategy, and the careful orchestration of power, now faced a legal battle that tested every skill he had developed over decades in the criminal world. The prosecution had assembled a formidable case, relying heavily on witness testimony, documentation, and surveillance. While Gotti's defense team worked tirelessly to challenge each claim and preserve both his freedom and his authority, the most challenging aspect of the prosecution's case was the use of cooperating witnesses, former associates and soldiers, some of whom had once been fiercely loyal to Gotti, now provided detailed accounts of the family's operations, including loan sharking, extortion, gambling, and acts of violence. Their testimonies were intended to establish a direct connection between Gotti and criminal activities, framing him as the mastermind behind a web of illegal enterprises. For the defense, countering these accounts required careful examination of credibility, motive, and potential inconsistencies. Each witness became a focal point in the battle between narrative and truth, with Gotti's fate hanging in the balance. Gotti's approach to the courtroom was as calculated as his actions in the streets. He remained composed, projecting confidence and poise despite the gravity of the charges. His demeanor was not merely for show. It reflected a strategic understanding of human behavior. By maintaining calm, he reassured supporters, unsettled jurors, and subtly reinforced the perception of control. Every gesture, expression, and interaction was a deliberate part of his defense, demonstrating psychological awareness that extended beyond legal strategy into the realm of influence and perception management. Evidence presented by the prosecution was extensive. Surveillance tapes, wiretap recordings, and financial records were carefully analyzed to show Gotti's involvement in criminal operations. The defense responded by scrutinizing the sources, challenging the legality of the methods, and highlighting potential misinterpretation. Gotti himself relied on indirect oversight and delegation to ensure that the operational chain was not easily linked to him, a strategy that had served him well in avoiding previous convictions. This balance of direct and indirect involvement was central to his defense, demonstrating foresight, discipline, and an understanding of both human and institutional dynamics. Throughout the trial, the role of loyalty became evident. Associates who remained loyal to Gotti refused to testify against him, reinforcing his image of authority and cohesion. The prosecution attempted to exploit fractures within the family, offering plea deals and reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. Gotti anticipated these tactics, emphasizing loyalty and discretion among his inner circle. This period highlighted the intersection of legal strategy and organizational management, showing how leadership within a criminal enterprise could influence outcomes even within a federal courtroom. The courtroom drama was intensified by media coverage. Journalists closely followed every development, reporting on witnesses, evidence, and the Dapper Don's demeanor. While this coverage heightened public fascination, it also amplified the pressure on Gotti. Yet, he navigated this environment with the same strategic calm that had defined his rise. His composed presence, sharp attire, and careful interactions sent a message to both the public and his associates. The boss remained in control, resilient under scrutiny, unshaken by external pressure. Gotti's legal team played a critical role in managing both the procedural and psychological aspects of the trial. They meticulously examined evidence, cross-examined witnesses, and presented arguments designed to introduce doubt and challenge the credibility of prosecution claims. Each interaction, each objection, and each strategic move was designed to protect Gotti while preserving his authority within the Gambino family. The courtroom, in this sense, became an extension of the battles he had waged for decades, a contest of intelligence, perception, and influence. One of the most intense moments came when key witnesses provided detailed accounts of past operations. These testimonies were designed to show both criminal activity and Gotti's leadership role. The defense countered by highlighting inconsistencies, motives for deception, and alternative interpretations of events. Gotti himself remained calm, listening intently, responding only when necessary, and allowing his legal team to manage direct confrontation. His restraint reflected a deep understanding of strategy. Visible composure could influence jurors, intimidate witnesses, and maintain the image of authority. The trial also tested Gotti's ability to manage internal family dynamics. Associates were under pressure from both law enforcement and the prosecution, and any misstep could create vulnerabilities. Gotti emphasized the importance of discipline, loyalty, and operational caution. By maintaining this internal stability, he reduced the risk of testimony against him and reinforced his position as the leader who could command respect and obedience even under extraordinary external pressure. As the courtroom proceedings unfolded, the tension mounted. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every procedural decision had profound implications. Gotti's strategy combined meticulous legal defense with psychological awareness, projecting an image of calm authority while relying on his team to navigate the complexities of federal law. The trial was not just a legal battle, it was a test of influence, strategy, and resilience, reflecting the qualities that had allowed him to rise through the ranks and consolidate power within the Gambino family. By the conclusion of this chapter, The trial of John Gotti illustrates the convergence of leadership, strategy, and human psychology under extreme pressure. He faced the combined weight of legal scrutiny, media attention, and potential betrayal from within, yet he navigated these challenges with intelligence, composure, and decisive management of both perception and loyalty. The Dapper Don's courtroom battles were more than a fight for freedom. They were an extension of his lifelong mastery of power, influence, and calculated risk, highlighting the intricate interplay of criminal leadership and the law. After months of intense courtroom proceedings, John Gotti's trial reached its climax. The courtroom had been a theater of tension, a place where strategy, loyalty, and human behavior were tested under the scrutiny of law and media alike. Now, as the jury deliberated, the outcome would determine not only the fate of the Dapper Don, but also the future of the Gambino crime family he had led with such confidence and authority. The stakes were enormous, and the atmosphere outside the courthouse reflected a mix of fascination, anxiety, and anticipation. Gotti had faced formidable charges, including racketeering, loan sharking, extortion, and orchestrated acts of violence. Federal prosecutors had constructed their case meticulously, relying on wiretap, surveillance, financial records, and the testimonies of former associates. Each piece of evidence was presented with the intention of demonstrating Gotti's leadership role and direct involvement in criminal operations. The defense, in contrast, had sought to discredit witnesses, question the legality and interpretation of evidence, and emphasize Gotti's composed, calculated nature. The courtroom had become a battleground where law, strategy, and psychology intersected. Throughout the trial, Gotti maintained an air of composure. He dressed impeccably, projecting the same image of the Dapper Don that had characterized his public persona for years. His calm demeanor was deliberate, a tool of influence designed to reassure supporters, unsettle adversaries, and shape perception. While jurors weighed evidence and testimonies, Gotti's presence in the courtroom reinforced a subtle message. He remained in control, unshaken by scrutiny, and confident in his ability to navigate the challenges before him. The jury's deliberations were tense and closely watched. Legal analysts, media outlets, and the public debated the potential outcome, reflecting both the notoriety of Gotti and the gravity of the case. Within the Gambino family, associates and captains understood the implications. A conviction would create uncertainty, disrupt operations, and challenge the cohesion that Gotti had carefully maintained over the years. Yet, many remained loyal, their confidence rooted in years of disciplined leadership and strategic foresight that had defined the Dapper Don's tenure. When the verdict was finally delivered, it marked a turning point in the history of organized crime in New York. John Gotti was convicted on multiple counts, including murder, racketeering, and extortion. The Dapper Don's rise, celebrated and feared across the criminal underworld, had culminated in a dramatic fall under the weight of federal scrutiny and legal persistence. The conviction sent a clear message to the underworld: no figure, regardless of charisma or influence, was immune to the reach of law enforcement. The immediate aftermath of the verdict brought both personal and organizational consequences. For Gotti, it meant the beginning of a lengthy sentence in federal prison, where the freedom and influence he had wielded so effectively would be constrained. For the Gambino family, the loss of the leader necessitated adjustments in leadership and operation. While Gotti's inner circle continued to manage day-to-day activities, the absence of his direct oversight introduced both uncertainty and opportunities for rivals, internal and external, to test the family's cohesion. Despite the conviction, Gotti's influence did not disappear entirely. His reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, continued to command respect and loyalty. Associates recognized that while legal circumstances had limited his freedom, his strategic acumen, decisiveness, and past successes had created a legacy that could not be erased easily. Even in confinement, the Dapper Don's presence remained a psychological and symbolic force within the organization. Leadership, in this sense, was not entirely about physical presence. It was about the influence one commanded through relationships, reputation, and legacy. The media coverage of the conviction amplified the dramatic nature of Gotti's fall. Newspapers, television programs, and documentaries chronicled the rise and fall of the Dapper Don, emphasizing the contrast between his flamboyant public persona and the consequences of criminal leadership under federal law. This attention reinforced the duality of Gotti's legacy, admired and feared. In the underworld, notorious and symbolic in the public sphere, his story became emblematic of the intersection of power, charisma, and accountability, illustrating the delicate balance required to maintain authority in both criminal and societal arenas. Within the prison system, Gotti faced the challenges of confinement and diminished autonomy. Yet, his leadership style, calculated, strategic, and psychological, astute, allowed him to navigate this new environment with resilience. He maintained relationships, observed dynamics, and continued to exercise influence where possible. The transition from the streets to incarceration highlighted the adaptability that had characterized his career, even when removed from the direct exercise of power. Gotti's understanding of human behavior and organizational dynamics allowed him to assert subtle authority. For the Gambino family, the conviction prompted a reassessment of leadership and operational strategies. Captains and loyal soldiers were required to manage operations more autonomously, making decisions that Gotti had previously overseen. This shift tested the family's cohesion, loyalty, and operational efficiency. While the absence of the Dapper Don introduced challenges, the foundations of authority, discipline, and loyalty that he had established over decades continued to influence behavior and decision-making within the organization. Reflecting on this period, it is evident that John Gotti's conviction marked both an end and a continuation. It was the end of his unfettered freedom and the immediate exercise of authority, but it also represented the continuation of his legacy through the relationships, structures, and reputation he had built. The Dapper Don story was not simply one of crime and punishment. It was a narrative of strategic intelligence, leadership, and the interplay between power and accountability. As this chapter closes, the impact of the verdict underscores the complexity of Gotti's life and legacy. His rise and fall illustrate the challenges of leadership under constant scrutiny, the consequence of visibility and notoriety, and the enduring influence of charisma and strategy. The Dapper Don story, marked by audacity, skill, and resilience, continues to resonate as a powerful example of the delicate balance between authority, loyalty, and the inevitable reach of justice. Following his conviction, John Gotti's world shifted dramatically. From the streets of New York to the confines of a federal prison, the flamboyant public persona that had earned him the nickname the Dapper Don, his sharp suit, his commanding presence, and his charismatic leadership, was replaced by the strict routines, institutional rules, and controlled environment of incarceration. Yet, even behind bars, Gotti's influence, strategic mind, and psychological acumen did not vanish. Prison life would test his resilience, adaptability, and ability to maintain authority in a setting where freedom was constrained and every action was scrutinized. Initially, the transition was jarring. Gotti had spent decades operating as a figure of authority, navigating complex criminal networks, and commanding loyalty across multiple crews and territories. In prison, much of that autonomy was removed, replaced by rigid schedules, security protocols, and the constant presence of law enforcement oversight. Yet, as with every challenge in his life, Gotti approached the situation with observation, patience, and strategy. He quickly assessed the environment, the hierarchy among inmates, and the routines of the prison system, identifying ways to exert influence and maintain a degree of control within the limitations imposed upon him. Gotti's reputation preceded him inside the prison walls. Fellow inmates and prison staff alike were aware of the man they were dealing with, a notorious figure whose life story was widely publicized and whose charisma and leadership had been legendary on the outside. This awareness provided him with a certain level of respect, but it also brought scrutiny. Gotti needed to navigate carefully, asserting authority subtly while avoiding actions that might provoke conflict with staff or rival inmates. His ability to project confidence and command respect without overt display of intimidation became essential to his survival and continued influence. One of the most significant aspects of Gotti's prison experience was his ongoing ability to communicate with associates outside. Even from behind bars, he remained connected to the Gambino family, providing guidance and oversight through intermediaries and carefully controlled channels. This indirect management allowed him to maintain a level of authority and ensure operational continuity, demonstrating his strategic foresight and understanding of organizational dynamics. Loyalty, discipline, and trust remained as critical inside prison as they had on the street, and Gotti's careful management of these elements reinforced his lasting influence. Life in prison also required adjustments to personal habits and routines. The freedom, luxury, and visibility that had characterized Gotti's public life were replaced by regimented schedules, communal living spaces, and strict rules. He adapted by observing carefully, choosing alliances wisely, and projecting a calm, composed demeanor. Even in confinement, he remained keenly aware of human behavior, understanding the psychology of inmates and staff alike. This awareness allowed him to navigate potential conflicts, build respect among peers, and maintain a degree of personal safety and influence within the institutional environment. Prison life, however, was not without its pressures. Isolation from family, friends, and the world he once controlled imposed emotional and psychological challenges. Yet Gotti relied on mental discipline, drawing on decades of experience in managing stress, uncertainty, and high-stakes situations. He maintained focus on the long term, understanding that his ability to endure, influence, and preserve relationships could mitigate the limitations imposed by incarceration. In many ways, his approach to prison mirrored his approach to leadership, calculated, observant, and strategic. Interactions with other inmates and groups within the prison system required careful navigation. Gotti had to establish boundaries, command respect, and manage relationships without provoking unnecessary conflict. He relied on a combination of reputation, composure, and subtle psychological influence to maintain his standing. The Dapper Don's ability to read behavior, anticipate reactions, and assert influence through nonverbal cues became a critical tool, allowing him to operate effectively even within the rigid structures of prison life. Another important factor was Gotti's legal awareness. Even while serving his sentence, he remained informed about legal proceedings, appeals, and developments related to his associates outside. He monitored communications, understood procedural dynamics, and maintained connections with his legal team. This focus on information and strategic oversight reflected the same intelligence that had guided his rise, demonstrating that leadership, influence, and foresight could extend beyond physical presence. Despite confinement, Gotti's legacy continued to resonate. Associates outside continued to acknowledge his authority, and the structures he had established over decades allowed the Gambino family to remain functional and cohesive. His name retained power, and stories of his decisiveness, charisma, and strategic skill continued to reinforce respect and loyalty. In this sense, Gotti's influence had transcended geography, even in prison. Dapper Don's shadow extended into the criminal world he had once dominated. Gotti's time behind bars also underscored the limitations of power and the inevitability of consequence. While his influence persisted, the environment imposed strict control, reminding him of the cost of visibility, ambition, and audacity. The contrast between life on the streets and life in prison highlighted the delicate balance between authority and vulnerability, freedom and constraint, reputation and reality. Even the most formidable leaders were subject to circumstances beyond their control, and Gotti's experience illustrated the challenges inherent in navigating those boundaries. As this chapter closes, John Gotti's life in prison reveals a different dimension of his story. The Dapper Don, once a commanding figure on the streets of New York, adapted to the constraints of incarceration with observation, strategy, and resilience. He maintained influence, commanded respect, and navigated the complexities of human behavior and institutional dynamics. Prison life tested his leadership in new ways, emphasizing patience, psychological acuity, and adaptability. Yet even behind bars, the Dapper Don's legacy endured, reflecting the remarkable blend of charisma, intelligence, and strategy that had defined his rise, his reign, and his lasting imprint on the world of organized crime. As the years passed, John Gotti's life behind bars became a stark contrast to the flamboyant, commanding figure who had once dominated the streets of New York. The sharp suits, public attention, and constant aura of control that defined the Dapper Don's rise had faded into the regimented routines of federal incarceration. Yet, even as time and circumstance imposed limitations, Gotti's presence, symbolic, psychological, and operational, continued to resonate both within prison walls and across the Gambino family. The final chapter of his life is a study of reflection, endurance, and the enduring imprint of a complex and formidable figure. Gotti's health began to decline in the confined, stressful environment of prison life. The years of stress, high-stakes decision-making, and the psychological pressures of leadership had taken their toll, compounded by the limited medical care available within the system. Yet, even amid physical decline, Gotti retained his mental acuity, a testament to the discipline and intelligence that had propelled him to the top of the criminal underworld. Observers noted that his awareness of human behavior, strategic thinking, and understanding of organizational dynamics remained sharp, even as his physical presence waned. During these years, Gotti's reflections on his life grew more pronounced. Removed from the immediacy of operations and public scrutiny, he had the rare opportunity to contemplate the trajectory that had brought him from the streets of Queens to the pinnacle of the Gambino crime family. He considered the delicate balance between loyalty and betrayal, power and consequence, visibility and vulnerability. In private moments, he analyzed decisions, victories, and miscalculations, drawing lessons from decades of navigating complex human dynamics under extreme pressure. This introspection highlighted the depth of his intelligence and the sophistication with which he had approached both leadership and survival. Despite confinement, Gotti remained connected to the outside world, particularly to the structure and operations of the Gambino family. Trusted associates continued to report to him, ensuring that his influence remained present even in absence. Gotti's strategic directives and guidance reinforced cohesion within the organization, demonstrate the enduring power of reputation, discipline, and psychological influence. Even as physical freedom was curtailed, The Dapper Don's authority extended beyond the prison walls, illustrating the lasting reach of a leader who had mastered both human and organizational behavior. Public perception of Gotti also evolved during his final years, once celebrated and vilified in equal measure for his audacity, charisma, and criminal exploits. The narrative of the Dapper Don became one of legend. Media retrospectives, documentaries, and publications examined his life, highlighting both his strategic brilliance and the consequences of his choices. While society judged his criminality, there was also widespread recognition of his ability to inspire loyalty, command attention, and navigate challenges with intelligence and composure. His story became emblematic of the intricate interplay between power, notoriety, and consequence. In prison, Gotti's interactions reflected a mixture of respect, caution, and observation. Fellow inmates, aware of his reputation, treated him with deference, yet he navigated these dynamics carefully, understanding that respect in confinement required subtlety and awareness rather than overt displays of authority. Staff, administrators noted his composure, his ability to anticipate human behavior, and his nuanced approach to relationships, even within the highly controlled environment of incarceration. The qualities that had defined his leadership remained evident: intelligence, observation, strategic patience, and psychological acumen. Gotti's declining health and the limitations of prison life also prompted reflections on mortality and legacy. He considered not only the immediate impact of his actions but also the enduring consequences for those who had operated under his leadership. His decisions had shaped the lives of associates, family members, and the broader landscape of organized crime. These reflections highlighted both the power he had wielded and the vulnerability inherent in a life lived at the center of attention, risk, and influence. In many ways, these final years were defined by the reconciliation of ambition, consequence, and the inexorable passage of time. The Gambino family, while adapting to the absence of their leader, continued to operate with structures established under Gotti's tenure. Captains and crews navigated a landscape altered by law enforcement attention, internal dynamics, and changing social conditions. Yet the foundational principles of loyalty, discipline, and strategic awareness persisted. Gotti's influence, reinforced by decades of leadership and reputation, continued to shape decision and behavior, illustrating the durability of his legacy even after his direct control had ended. As Gotti's health continued to deteriorate, the inevitability of his final chapter became apparent. He faced the limitations of aging, confinement, and illness, confronting a reality far removed from the streets where he had once commanded attention and respect. Yet, even in these final moments, his story reflected resilience, strategic insight, and the enduring complexity of a figure who had risen to the top of one of the most formidable criminal organizations in history. The Dapper Don's life, marked by audacity, intelligence, and influence, remained a testament to the intricate balance between power and consequence, charisma and vulnerability. The conclusion of Gotti's life also invites reflection on the broader lessons of his journey. His rise and fall illustrate the challenges inherent in leadership, particularly within high-risk, high-stakes environments. His ability to inspire loyalty, maintain control, and navigate both human and organizational dynamics was remarkable, even as it ultimately collided with the mechanisms of law and justice. Gotti's story serves as a study in the interplay between strategy, influence, and consequence, offering insight into both the allure and the limitations of power. As this chapter closes, John Gotti's legacy is clear. He was a figure of extraordinary presence, strategic intelligence, and enduring influence. The Dapper Don's life spanned audacious ambition, ruthless pragmatism, and calculated leadership, leaving a lasting imprint on organized crime, public perception, and historical memory. Even as his life ended in confinement, the lessons of his journey, the stories of his rise and fall, and the psychological and strategic mastery he displayed continue to resonate. The story of John Gotti, the Dapper Don, endures not simply as a tale of crime, but as a narrative of leadership, resilience, and the complex interplay between human ambition and the consequences of choices.